American baseball history with commentary from Phil S. Dixon. Let me see if I can get my camera straightened out here. We're kind of moving around here. Make sure we get this correct here. I don't want too much movement here. Let me check this out. Yeah, so this is another edition of This Day in African American Baseball History. Thank you for bearing with me. And this is Phil Dixon, and I'm coming to you with the November 4th, 2025 edition of this current saga that I'm doing in baseball. So I thank you for everybody who's joined me, and happy election day. I'm sure I may come back on this evening. I don't know. I know I've got some games on election day. I'm not mentioning many of those right now, but I think that I ought to come back on. If I do, I'll come back on with election day broadcast. Maybe come up with a few gems for you. But right now, I want to go through and talk about some things that happened on November 4th throughout history. And of course, if you're new to this broadcast, what I do is I give you an event that happened this day related to African American baseball players. Now, they are baseball players, but baseball players are doing more than playing baseball. So that's kind of what I talk about. You know, you may get a guy playing football, basketball, hockey, and of course, baseball. So that's what I kind of talk about. And I just want to thank everybody for joining. If you like what I'm doing, be sure and hit the subscription button. We're growing, and we're trying to get these watch hours and also the number of people. So I'm looking to try to reach 1,000 people as subscribers by December 31st. So got a lot of work to do, but dropping a lot of history. So if you like this kind of information, hey guys, I've got it right here. So right now, let's go to get started. Let's go to Sunday, November 4th, 1928. Joe Lillard. Now, I've talked about Joe Lillard quite a bit. He was a multi-sport athlete, playing as a member of the Minneapolis-based Forshay football team. That's F-O-S-H-A-Y, Forshay football team. Helped his team to a 26-0 shutout win over the Christian Lindsays in Minneapolis. And they were calling this amateur football, kind of like they called the Negro League teams amateur baseball. But these guys were probably professional. So anyway, people thought a lot of them because they drew 15,000 people to a place called Parade Park in the Twin Cities. And Lillard was always fantastic in these games. And he kicked 2 after touchdown extra points. No touchdowns in this game. But so the guy, not only could he run the ball, let me make a note here. He not only could he run the ball very well, but he was also a great place kicker. So that's Joe Lillard. Don't know how much you know about Joe Lillard, but I'm all here. We're in the lesson and we're learning here. So Joe Lillard is one of the all-time greats. And just shortly, coming up soon, we'll be talking about him playing basketball for the Savoy Ballroom 5. A good basketball player too. Good baseball player, good football player, played in the NFL. So this guy was a multi-sport athlete, played 3 professional sports, and most of you have never heard of him before. So this is why we do this history and why we're keeping these guys alive, okay? So let's go to, we're going to go out to California. So we're going to go to November 4th, 1928. Same day, different place though. The first event happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This one happens on the Pacific Coast. And so Ed Bryan, B-R-Y-A-N, a Pacific Coast League pitcher, sit down members of the El Patio Laundry African American team in a 7-3 win for the Orange County Merchants at the Orange County Fairgrounds. And Bob Fagan, who was playing for the Laundry team, I don't know how much you know about the 25th Infantry, but he had played baseball for the 25th Infantry, and that was probably one of the greatest military teams that's ever been assembled. And certainly, they were good enough to be professional with the people they had. Oscar Heavy Johnson, and one time Oscar Charleston played for them, and they had Bob Fagan was one of their guys. Wilbur Bullet Rogan. Man, I can go on and on. That was a really good team. Dobie Moore. I mean, how can I forget Dobie Moore? Walter Dobie Moore out of Georgia, man. But they were a really good ball team, and some of these guys ended up coming to the Negro National League and became prominent in black baseball circles once the league started and they left the military around 1920, right in that period. So they became pretty good, famous baseball players from the Negro Leagues. But for years, nobody talked much about their military baseball. And Rogan was simply outstanding in the military. And so Bob Fagan was with him. And so Bob Fagan is playing in this game, and he's playing against a Pacific Coast League pitcher. And Bob Fagan had played for the Kansas City Monarchs as well. 1921, he was with the Monarchs. There's a great picture photograph there. I've seen, actually, there's a history behind that photograph. It has John Donaldson's on that photograph, and it's a really nice photograph. It has all the players' names. Zach Foreman's on there. Sylvester Foreman's on there. Hurley McNair. But Fagan is on there, and the only picture I know photograph of Fagan with the Monarchs is that particular picture. Now, that picture really originally came from J. Bird Ray, and some of his family members had that picture, and I was able to speak with them in the 1980s. And then when the Negro Leagues came on board, they donated it to the Negro Leagues. But I have seen other pictures taken by that same photographer that have never showed up. One of them was in York, Pennsylvania, and it was in 1921 Indianapolis ABC. So I get the feeling that this photographer took photographs of the entire league, and hopefully some of those will show up because they were just simply beautiful photographs. And that was the one that featured Bob Fagan. And so, Bob Fagan, he had one of the hits off of Brian. Brian gave up 6 hits that day, and he struck out, I think he struck out 7. So that is Bob Fagan. Bob Fagan ended up being out on the West Coast after his baseball career ended. And most people, when they talk about the Negro Leagues, once again, I can say this every time I come on, these are guys who are rarely talked about. And even when you see these guys, they're making retro baseball cards and they're trying to figure out who they can feature. Bob Fagan is not one that they feature very often. And neither is Joe Lillard. I don't know if anybody has, one of these contemporary cards of Joe Lillard, but hopefully listening to this broadcast, maybe I have to do it because I can't wait for you guys, because some of the people listen to the broadcast, they're just too slow. And they're too wrapped up in the American and National League to ever see somebody who's in black baseball other than somebody who's in the Hall of Fame or somebody's receiving a lot of publicity. So it's my job to get these other guys publicity. That's what I'm doing. All right. Okay, so let's go to one more baseball fact, and then we'll do how I end my broadcast is we do a coming and a going. That's someone who was born on this date, somebody who passed away on this date. And I just happen to have 2 of those. Somebody who came and somebody who left on November the 4th. So let's go to this last baseball fact. November the 4th, 1931, Willie Foster pitched an 8-hitter and struck out 9, while his Hall of Fame teammates battered San Diego's George Cook in a 6-3 win at that city's Navy Field. Mule Suttles homered, Cool Papa Bell got 3 hits, Biz Mackey a hit, and Willie Wells scored a run. And man, that had to be a hell of a lineup there. But the winter leagues had great lineups because they would take some of the best ball players and they would go out to California. And then the American National League, they would send some of their best guys there. They're going to come out to California and winter out there, play a little baseball. Usually they played on a Saturday, Sunday, sometime Friday. Of course, they're going to have the annual Thanksgiving game, the annual Christmas game, the annual New Year's Day game. And so there was a lot of good action going on in California, and you get a lot of interaction between some pretty big-time name players and quite a few players who played in the Pacific Coast League as well. And that whole circuit right along the coast there. Some of those guys were good enough to come to American National League, but they just stayed out there. Never really came west to play and some of those teams in New York and St. Louis and Chicago, they just stayed out in California. Can't blame them. The weather was great out there. So anyway, that is a little bit of that history. So Willie Foster, Hall of Famer. And then we got Coop Papa Bell, Hall of Famer. Mule Suttles, Hall of Famer. Biz Mackey, Hall of Famer. Willie Wells, Hall of Famer. Matter of fact, they've got more guys up on that team in the Hall of Fame probably than who knows how many other great players there were. But the interesting thing is, at that time, because they were African American players, no one ever considered that they were that great. And even in the 1940s, when they did actually have a Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, they opened that, what, 1937, 36, somewhere in there, they still didn't consider those guys as Hall of Famers because it just wasn't in their imagination. It was like not in their imagination that a black man would be enshrined right along with Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb and Cy Young and Walter Johnson and Grover Cleveland Alexander. It was a totally oblivious concept. But guys, in 45 years I've been involved with this history, I've seen some remarkable things, and that's one of them. And so anyway, Willie Foster, never had the chance to interview Willie Foster. Willie Foster, in his latter years, he was the Dean of Men at Alcorn A&M. I had a good friend that was at Alcorn. Actually, I had a couple of good friends that went to Alcorn, and he was the Dean of Men. One of them was a musician friend, Larry Wilson. He's passed on, and he went down there. He ended up being a drum major, and so he was down there. And then another good friend of mine named Ron Stevenson, who was a catcher, who went down and played there. Then also there was a guy that I emulated growing up playing baseball in the sandlots of Kansas City named Herman Randall. Somebody, if you're from Kansas City, you're listening to this, you might know some of these names. Herman Randall. He played a high school baseball, and I remember I was in the 10th grade. He was a senior trying to make the team, and I was playing outfield, and they hit the ball out there, man. I pulled everything down with one hand. I could run and pull things down. And so Herman came over to me one day. He said, if you don't stop catching with one hand, he said, you're going to be on the sophomore team. Well, I knew they didn't have a sophomore team. We just had a varsity and JV. So I said, hey, they don't have a sophomore team. He said, that's what I'm trying to tell you. You need to catch with two hands. And that was one of the best advice I ever got from Herman Randall, who went on to be quite the player at Alcorn. He was a pitcher and also a great outfielder. But these are guys who I wanted to be like growing up, watching them on the Kansas City, Kansas sandlots in the old, what we call Heathwood Park is the name of it. The park is still there. It's been modified to the point that it's no longer the park we grew up in. But we draw good crowds at that park, believe it or not. I look at teams now, and I coach for 30 years, and it would take us maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 games to get the crowd that I used to see in one game on a regular basis. So Heathwood Park was the place. A lot of good guys came through there. Ed Dwight played for the Kansas City Monarchs, came through Heathwood Park. I can think of a few others too who came out of Kansas City. Booker T. McDaniels. Booker McDaniels pitched for the Monarchs. He pitched there in Heathwood Park. So it was like a legendary field in the African American community. So So when I think about all these Hall of Famers, I think about, the things I've seen in baseball through all those years. So Willie Foster, like I said, I didn't interview him, but I did interview his sister. So she was living in Chicago at that time in the apartment that Ruth Foster owned. Of course, Willie and Ruth Foster, two brothers, are in the Hall of Fame. So great history there. So let's go on. So now I'm going to give you a coming and a going. We're moving along quickly, right on time. Once again, thank everyone. I'm thanking everybody who's joined me. And I know sometimes you can't stay for the whole broadcast, but if you like what I'm doing, you can always come back, and I'll be back tomorrow as well. And so, but I appreciate you kind of hanging in there. And I do want to say hello to a few people. And before I go to this last segment, I got somebody called Princess_Batman saying hello. Then I have Landon Johnston saying hello. And then I have somebody named Herb Gillespie said, my dad told me Satchel Paige and Jackie Robinson had issues. I don't know what those issues were, but I don't know. Maybe your dad knows something I don't, but I know, I know the Page family, and I interviewed Jackie's wife before, and I'd like to know what you're trying to say there. All right, but I can tell you this: there's a lot of greatness here that you need to know about more than the issues. The issue is that these men aren't getting enough recognition. That's the real issue. That's the real issue that the players have. They're not getting the rep that they should be getting, and their place in baseball history has never been certified and stamped approved like it will be when we continue to tell this story. All right, so let's go to a coming somebody born on this date. Okay, November the 4th, 1904. Theodore Bubbles Anderson is born in Denver, Colorado. Okay, he was one of the Monarchs recruits from the 5 Points area in Denver, and a former infielder for the local White Elephants team. That was an African-American team operating out of Denver. And also, let's see. Okay, then he also played for the All Nations. Now, to give you a little bit of history on Denver, I've been there in Colorado Springs. I've presented in Manitou Springs before. Been around the state quite a bit. I actually presented in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is about 60 miles from Denver. So I've been in that area. Now, the 5 Points area was pretty much where all the African-American people, for the most part, lived in Denver. That's where the Monarchs would stay in the hotel there when they would go out west and play there. And so, but that was the area, the 5 Points area. So most of these ball players are going to come from there. And whenever I speak in Denver, I always speak at the 5 Points Library. And then usually I might pick up like a Rotary Club or something like that. But I make a point to go to the 5 Points Public Library, because that is the historic Black community. And I'm trying to get this message to my people. And so I have to go where they are. And I used to have a pretty good crowd that comes there to hear me whenever I'm out in Colorado. So that's interesting. Then also, I'm thinking about Anderson. The reason we know quite a bit about Anderson is because back in the 1990s, there was a guy named Jay Sanford. And Jay, good friend of mine, good friend. Whenever I go to Colorado, I always go to dinner with Jay. Jay's getting up in age now, but we're talking about 30 years ago or more. And Jay was interested in the Negro Leagues, and so he began working. I began helping him, and Jay just ran away with it. And he was able to get monuments at the gravesite of Bubbles Anderson, also not Oscar Michelle, or who am I thinking about? The great third baseman there. I'll call his name from New Orleans. Oh, shucks, I'll call his name in a minute. Having a senior moment. It'll come to me. So anyway, yeah, he was able to get monuments. He did quite a bit of work on George Taylor, who played for the old Page Finch Giants. He did quite a bit of work on George Taylor. And then also there's another guy named William Castone. That was a great pitcher that played for the Lincoln Giants, 1890. And Jay was a guy who helped to bring that history to the forefront. So we want to thank and acknowledge Jay for his hard work that he did in bringing this information. And then also, I might mention too, some people know that I play trumpet, because if you look some of my clips from the past there on my YouTube, you'll see me playing the national anthem. Sometimes I play the taps at different ball players who are veterans' graves. And so actually, maybe if I get out to Colorado, maybe I'll stop by Bubbles Anderson, because he was a World War II vet. And this guy, he died at age 38, so he didn't live long. But I'm so happy that we can talk about him today. And so that is somebody I just enjoy talking about. But all of these players are just a treat to speak about. So anyway, yeah, so because I play trumpet, back in the 70s, we would go out to Colorado, and Colorado had a place called Smitty's. Smitty's was the place that most Kansas City musicians, if they were playing funk music, that's where, when I say funk music, that was dance music for us. So that's where you would play if you got to Denver. It was Smitty's. And along the way, that's different places. So I know a good friend of mine, Lonnie McFadden, who's still playing. Matter of fact, him and his brother used to open up for Wayne Newton. They still, his brother Ronald's passed on, but Lonnie's still playing in Kansas City, and they played at Smitty's. And so, and then of course a band from Kansas City called Clyde Nimmenher that was quite influential to most of us. Used to go and play at Smitty's. And then from Smitty's, there was nothing in the middle. So after you play Smitty's, then you got to jump all the way over to Las Vegas before you find another population of African Americans. So it was Denver's that drop off point, and it was like that for big bands and even through the funk era. Smitty's was that last point, and Denver was that last kind of stumping ground for African American baseball teams as well as they go out to the West Coast. So Denver got some interesting games, and I have a good friend out there, Bill Visas. He has the #1 sports card store in Colorado. It's the oldest one and it's the greatest one in Denver. If you ever go out to Denver, man, you got to go see Bill's Collectibles. Bill Visas, man, great guy. Met him when I was, believe it or not, 20 years old. We were collecting, and I lived for a minute in Colorado Springs, and Bill was there. And but Bill went on, and he kept going with this, and I went back to music, but Bill went on and ended up opening up the sports collector store. And so whenever I go to Denver, I got to visit Bill Visas too. So if anybody listening from Colorado, somebody, tell Bill I said hello, and tell Jay I said hello too. I certainly would appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to go to the last one I have today, and this is someone who passed away on this date. And on November 16, 1918, Pearl Specks Webster died during the World War I conflict from the influenza as he was crossing over from America headed to Europe. And we lost a lot of good guys, never gotten into action. The influenza got a lot of those guys. And Webster had been just an outstanding catcher, pitched for St. Louis. And in I want to say it was 15 or 16, he was playing with the Royal Ponciana team down in Florida, and that was in the spring. And when he was down there, William Dismukes was pitching for that team. And later on, maybe in the 1930s, Dismuke wrote a column about the greatest catchers in black baseball. And he went on to name people like Pete Booker and Petway, Bruce Petway. And in that top 10, he named, believe it or not, Specks Webster. And he knew what he was talking about because Webster had been his teammate. But Webster, he died early on, so a lot of people don't talk about Webster very much. But he was someone who died during the Great Conflict, not from the conflict, but he was in there, and it caused him to pass away. But prior to that, he had been just an outstanding catcher for many teams. They called him Specks. He was a light-skinned, complected guy who had freckles, and that's why they called him Specks Webster. So so that kind of concludes a little bit what I'm doing today, and I'm going to answer this one question, then I'm going to jump out of here. So somebody said, okay, this is Herb again. He said, my dad told me about Satchel Paige and Jackie Robinson had issues. Then, of course, I addressed that. And then he said, it sounded crazy to me. Also, I used to play baseball for ODU, my brother for UVS. I'm subscribing. Okay. I'm not sure what those abbreviations for, but go ahead and subscribe. And then sometime when I'll come back when I'm live and drop a little bit more in there. Somebody knows what ODU is, and I don't know what part of the country that you're in. That would also help too. But I appreciate you subscribing. Thank you for joining. Okay, here we go. Old Dominion and Virginia University. All right, then. This sounds like a real baseball guy. Okay. All right, so universities. All right. So I appreciate you being here, and listening to the broadcast today, guys. Went about 25 minutes. I try to keep them at 20 minutes. I think I just started talking too much today. So I'm going to end it right now. And if I get a chance, since it's election day, if I get a chance to pull some of my information, I'll come back and list maybe one or two exceptional games that happened on election day. Believe it or not, it's November, but guys, man, if you caught a year where the weather was really good, these guys would keep on playing as long as they could. And then we're talking about in Chicago and New York, Kansas City, in places where it's bound to snow. Minnesota, if they caught a good, what they call a Indian summer or whatever it is, and they could play ball, they just kept playing as long as they could, and they would charge you to get in the park. So they were making money at the same time. Guys, it's been my pleasure as always. If you like what I'm doing, go ahead and subscribe and keep following, and we'll keep on talking baseball like we love baseball, right? We'll keep on talking that way. And this is my 45th year as a historian, and I started collecting baseball cards when I was in the second grade, guys. I just turned 69, and I've been at this all that whole time. I can go into a lot of things and a lot of people I've met. Even worked as assistant director of PR for the Kansas City Royals. And most people may not know this. I'm the co-founder of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. Matter of fact, I'm the one who brought the idea to Kansas City. One of these days I'll explain that and explain how that all came about. All right. So if you've heard of the museum, guy, just know that somebody had to come up with that idea. And it probably had to be someone from our generation, because when I say our generation, because when I was born, there was no museum. There was even no talk of museum. If it was, I never saw it. So anyway, thank you guys. You have a nice day, and we'll get together soon. This is Phil Dixon signing off for now.